This mosque in Beirut is symbolic of a new era in the history of this city. And this was when the Muslim leader Yazid ibn Abu Sufyan was able to conquer Beirut and the other coastal cities of Lebanon in the 16th year after the Hijrah, or 736 CE. And this was after he was charged with the task by Abu Ubaidah ibn al-Jarrah, the commander of the Muslim armies in the Levant during the reign of the second Rashidoun Caliph, Omar ibn al-Khattab. This mosque was established that same year and was dubbed the Al-Omari Mosque, much like many of the other mosques built in that time period in honor of Omar. It is one of the oldest mosques of Beirut and was built on the site of an ancient Roman pagan temple, and, in its early days, was the only small mosque built for the soldiers of the Islamic garrison that conquered the city, freeing it from its Roman rulers. In the ensuing Islamic eras, this mosque was refurbished many times. Among those times was the renovation that took place during the time of Mamluk Sultan al-Ashraf Khalil ibn Kalawun, after the city was reclaimed from the occupation of the Crusaders. Additions and changes were also made to the structure in both Ottoman and the modern era. This mosque in its time had many names. Of those were the Mosque of Repentance, Mosque of Islamic Conquests, and the Mosque of the Prophet Yahya, but the best known name for it has always been Al-Omari Mosque. Another example of the mosques of the Islamic conquest era on the Lebanese coast is the Grand Omari Mosque in Sidon, to the south of Beirut, a city much like Beirut in that it was conquered by the garrison led by Yazid ibn Abu Sufyan, as charged by Abu Ubaidah.
The conquering Islamic army entered into Sidon at the time when Abu Ubaidah ibn Jarrah was its commander, who was also the viceroy of Damascus and its region during the caliphate of both Umar ibn al-Khattab and Uthman bin Affan, may God be pleased with them. They deputized Yazid bin Abi Sufyan over the city, and later Muawiyah bin Abi Sufyan.
The Grand Omari Mosque in Sidon signifies great change in the history of this city, which occurred after its Islamic conquest, establishing the Arab Islamic identity of the city and the region as a whole. The mosque lies on an elevated plain near the seashore and is said to have been built in the location of an old pagan temple, and was vandalized during the time of the Crusader occupation after it was reclaimed in the time of the Mamluks by Ashraf Khalil ibn Kalawun. He rebuilt the mosque, which was now renovated and refurbished in later eras. The latest of which was a refurbishment that took place in the time of Ottoman Sultan Abdul Hamid II. The mosque in all its elements is very similar to the Mosque of Bani Umayyah in Damascus. Its most prominent architectural element is its beautiful marble pulpit, which is in the forefront of the prayer area. The mosque's vaulted ceiling has maintained its structure for hundreds of years, a roof that is made all the more lovely by its beautiful laid bricks. At the same time that some of Abu Ubaidah's armies were working to establish security on the coast of the Levant, another army was moving through Palestine under the leadership of Amr ibn al-As, making a lot of progress and managing to conquer many of the cities along the coastal and interior areas. With the exception of Jerusalem, whose patriarch insisted on only handing the keys of the city over to the Caliph himself, which is what happened in the 16th year after Hijrah, when Omar arrived in the Holy Land and established peace, drafting for its people what had been known as the Omari Treaty. A series of mosques were established along the route Omar bin al-Khattab took on his journey to Jerusalem, all of which are known as the Omari Mosques. The use of these names has remained prevalent in spite of the great changes that have taken place in this area.
It was expected that normal practice would be the building of a mosque in each city conquered by the Muslims, so that when the Muslims were able to conquer all Palestine cities such as Tiberias, Ramle, Gaza, or any other area, the building of a mosque was necessary. So it cannot be said that these mosques are unique to Palestine or any other area for that matter. This practice of taking on a mosque or building one can be seen in all the cities conquered by the Muslims worldwide, something that went hand in hand with the nation's policies at the time, and so it is no surprise that these mosques were in fact built in the time of Omar.
Just as these mosques have been vandalized and demolished during the time of the Crusader occupation, they, along with many others, are faced with the same type of attacks from the Israeli army, which has demolished more than 1,200 mosques across the Palestinian territories, or reassigning their usage, as they did to the mosques in Safad, Jafar and Acre and many other areas. It is said that the Grand Mosque in Al-Ramla in Palestine was also an Omari mosque originally, and was later renovated by the Umayyad Caliph Solomon ibn Abdul Malik. Then, after the Crusaders destroyed much of it during their occupation of the lands, it was renovated by Saladin al-Ayyubi after he reclaimed Al-Ramla, while its dome was built later on by Al-Fahir Baybars. The city of Gaza, which was conquered by Ibn al-As, is the home to an important monument that is reminiscent of that era, and that is the Grand Omari Mosque in the center of the city, which is the oldest and most prominent of all mosques in the city of Gaza. The mosque can be found in the center of the old Gaza, near the old market, and was established during the early Islamic era.
Archaeological evidence points to the fact that this structure was a center of the Arab pagan religion in the area before the Islamic conquests, and was known back in those days as the Temple of Mana, Mana being an old Arabic Semite word meaning our elder or our lord, and so Mana was the lord of all of the 7 gods of the city of Gaza. And it was destroyed at the beginning of the 5th century, at a time when the patriarch of the city of Gaza was called Beforius, and he sought Arcadius, the emperor of the Byzantine nation at the time, asking him to demolish this structure and to build a church on top of it. And that is what happened at the start of the 5th century, so that the temple was destroyed and a church was built on top of it. And then when the Islamic conquests came, and with the conversion of most of the people of Gaza to Islam, the church was converted into a mosque and was known as the Grand Omari Mosque.
The total area of the Omari Mosque in Gaza is nearly 4,000 meters squared. While its interior courtyard covers nearly 1,200 meters squared of its total area, with its roof that sits atop 38 beautifully designed marble pillars.
About the same time as the conquest of Palestine, Gaza was one of the first cities to be liberated at the hands of the Muslim conquerors under the leadership of Amr ibn al-As in the time of Umar ibn al-Khattab. and that is why the city saw a great deal of growth and expansion. However, the most prominent legacy in terms of architectural buildings and designs that were left from the era are the mosques which can still be found today, the largest of which, in terms of area, and the most central of those was and still is the Grand Omari Mosque.
This mosque has a twin which is also known as the Omari Grand Mosque in Jeddah's city center. It is a grand mosque and was built by a decree of Amir al-Mu'mineen, Omar bin al-Khattab, may God be pleased with him. When we look at the Grand Mosque in Gaza, and then we compare it with the mosque which is in Jeddah, we see the uncanny resemblance between the two. The same images, antiquities, and evidence can be found in both structures.
The Omari Mosque in Gaza was renovated twice, once in the Mamluk era and again during the Ottoman era, only to be severely damaged again during World War I, when it was all but nearly destroyed. It remained in that condition until it was completely rebuilt and refurbished in the 1920s.
The mosque was the community's meeting place, bringing together most of the people of Gaza. The mosque was not only for prayer, but played a number of different roles. There you can find many historical stones in addition to 41 beautiful marble pillars. The stones I mentioned belong to a number of old mosques that no longer exist in Gaza. They were moved and built into the walls of this mosque, including the Turkomani Mosque and the Jawili Mosque, in addition to the mosques of Qaitbay and Al-Mu'allaq, and so the Omari Mosque is now a living exhibit to all these mosques which are now long gone but continue to live through the walls of this grand mosque.
The mosque houses an important library which is home to an extensive array of manuscripts covering all areas of scholarly endeavours and dates back to the time of Al-Thahiyya Babars. The city of Gaza was the gate of the Islamic conquest in Egypt. It was through that Ammar ibn al-As headed to the land of Kinana after the conquest of Jerusalem.
When Omar ibn al-Khattab arrived in Jerusalem after the conquest of the Levant, Amr ibn al-As spoke to him of the need to send an army for the conquest of Egypt, explaining to him that Egypt would be a source of great power to the Muslims and Arabs, and that it was a country with no army or counterforce and had the weakest defenses at the time. Omar ibn al-Khattab was reluctant according to some accounts, but Amr ibn al-As kept insisting until he finally agreed, and there are many different accounts. The important thing is that Amr ibn al-As began his advance on Egypt, and again the accounts vary, but some say that even Omar ibn al-Khattab was very reluctant. Some accounts say that after Amr's insistence, Omar agreed, while others say that Amr left with his army at night, and their departure was only realized the next morning. An unlikely story, because a leader like Amr would never take nearly 4,000 soldiers without the permission of the Caliph, especially in the case of Omar ibn al-Khattab, who was a strict and firm Caliph, especially when it came to military affairs.
Many factors played a role in Omar ibn al-Khattab's agreement to conquer Egypt, and who would have been better suited to the task than Ammar ibn al-As.
Amr ibn al-As has strong ties in Egypt and was familiar with the leader of the Copts who ruled Egypt, in addition to his familiarity with Abyssinia, which, if you look at modern-day geography, corresponds to the location of Sudan and not Ethiopia as some believe. So Amr ibn al-As was a person with distinct advantages because of his many visits and contacts and trade in this area, which qualified him to go to a land he knew well and to conquer it with prior knowledge and understanding.
After a few confrontations with the Romans in Sinai, Amr ibn al-As continued on his way to where the major confrontation took place, and that is the fortress of Babylon.
We are now on our way to the fortress at Babylon in Egypt, a fortress that has great historical significance, and it can even be said that the conquest of Egypt at the hands of Amr ibn al-As was determined at this fortress. The fortress used to be right on the banks of the Nile and was parallel to the city of Menf, the ancient Egyptian capital at the time. And when the Arab Muslims were able to take control of it, that in itself was considered the conquest of Egypt. The significance of this location today is that it is near the Coptic Museum, and that at a distance of 100 to 150 meters away from it lies the oldest mosque in Africa, and that is the Mosque of Amr ibn al-As, which is also where the homes of the companions who accompanied Amr during the conquests can be found.
After the arrival of Amr ibn al-As to the fortress of Babylon, his army set up camp there, and with that, he besieged the fortress in a siege that lasted nearly 7 months, with the famous fortress falling in the 20th year after Hijrah, and its fall came as an official announcement that Egypt had been conquered. The first step that Amr ibn al-As took after his great victory was to construct a mosque near the fortress of Babylon, making it the first mosque to be built in Egypt. Around the mosque he built homes for his soldiers, and this newly built up area became known as Al-Fustat, which became the first Islamic capital in Egypt.
We are currently in the area of Al-Fustat, or rather the city of Fustat, in front of the Amr ibn al-As mosque, which was built in the first city in the Egyptian Islamic history. Not many people know this, but Al-Fustat was built in the same site as the ancient city of Menf, the capital of ancient Egypt.
The mosque of Amr ibn al-As in Al-Fustat became the administrative headquarters for the Muslims in Egypt, and from it Amr continues his conquests of other regions in Egypt. The mosque of Amr ibn al-As was built in the 21st century after Hijrah, during the caliphate of Omar ibn al-Khattab, and even though it's simple architecturally, most like most of the other mosques in that era, it still played a major role in the lives of the Muslims. Its walls were built with bricks and its grounds were covered with gravel, while its roof was covered with palm leaves and its columns were made of palm tree trunks. The architecture of the mosque was developed in later eras, with its area expanded and its walls decorated. More gates were also added.
In front of us you can see Amr ibn al-As's mosque with its old minaret looming over us. This, like I said, is the oldest mosque in both Egypt and Africa. The mosque is not the only one in Egypt that is known as the Mosque of Amr ibn al-As, but it is the only one that was actually built during the time of Amr ibn al-As. For the sake of historical accuracy, one must note that this structure is not actually the mosque that Amr built. The original structure suffered the effects of many fires and as well as the destruction caused by the earthquakes that hit Egypt, and so the structure was rebuilt many times. And as you can see today, it stands a great structure with nothing left of the original mosque except for a piece of palm wood, which is said to have been placed by Amr ibn al-As himself in the pulpit of the old mosque. The mosque today is closer to a comprehensive Islamic institution, behind which the old city of Fustat lies. The city of Fustat was built by Amr ibn al-As as a headquarters for his rule over Egypt, and as a home away from home for the companions and other Arabs who came to Egypt, and so their homes were built behind the mosque.
The Amr ibn al-As mosque became the axis out of which the areas controlled by the Muslims spread both to the east and the west of the Islamic capital of Egypt. It reached its pinnacle when the Fatimids built the historic city of Cairo. after which the Ayyubids went further to the north and west, while the Mamluks added new areas to the city, which was also known as Cairo. But the beginning to all of this was indeed the humble mosque, much as the case was with all the new cities built by the Muslims after each of their conquests.